Okay, Turn On and Tune In is back, and I'm here to talk about SSRIs and psychedelics. But first of all, I need to put a disclaimer out there. I'm just a nurse. Please talk to a doctor. It would be especially helpful if you could find a practitioner who's an expert in psychedelic assisted therapy. There are some out there, especially in the Bay Area. San Francisco is a nice big hub of them. So, what exactly is an SSRI? Antidepressants are actually the third most commonly prescribed medication group in the whole world, and SSRIs make up about 80% of the antidepressants on the market. SSRIs stand for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They act by basically increasing the total amount of serotonin that's in the brain. They do this by blocking the transporter molecule that basically, the transporter molecule takes serotonin that's in the synapse in between two neurons. That transporter molecule takes it back up into the neuron, basically in a process called reuptake. An SSRI blocks that transporter, so it results in just a lot more serotonin hanging out in the synapse, which is the area between two neurons. This whole mechanism is predicated off of the theory that depression is linked to an overall low level of serotonin in the brain. But we know that there must be something more going on, because when you take an SSRI, within an hour, your serotonin levels spike up. But the full therapeutic feel-good effects of an SSRI take much longer. They take more like a month. So when you start an SSRI, you're not fully feeling better for an entire month. So this makes us know that there must be something more going on than just an overall higher amount of serotonin in the brain, because that happens so quickly within the first dose of an SSRI. So the secondary effects that we think are going on is that having an overall higher amount of serotonin in the brain, it causes the system to self-regulate. So then the system expresses less serotonin receptors. Because if you have more serotonin, but it's being blocked from being reuptaked, then you don't need as many receptors. But psychedelics, they act on these serotonin receptors. So this leads one to believe that perhaps a person who has been on or is currently taking SSRIs, they might have a blunted effect when it comes to taking a psychedelic. We know that SSRIs are used for things like depression, anxiety, PTSD, panic attacks, but more and more today, these are the exact same issues that psychedelic assisted therapy is aiming to help. So the question really becomes, are people who would be the most best served by psychedelic therapy, are they at a disadvantage because they have taken or are currently taking SSRIs? Also, is it safe? Can someone who is on SSRIs take psychedelics? So this is kind of what I'm aiming to discuss here in my little talk today. All right. I will say that not all experts in the field agree that taking SSRIs can actually blunt the effect of psychedelics. One specific researcher from Johns Hopkins, which is a major hub of psychedelic research and very trusted source, his name is Dr. Matthew Johnson. He did a study that was basically looking at psilocybin and people who have taken it with a history of SSRIs, and he didn't find any difference in the amount or the effects that the psilocybin had on these people. But overall, we do need to be careful because you just don't know how ultimately psychedelics and SSRIs interact. So you need to be extremely careful. And the solution should not be just, oh, I'm just going to stop taking my SSRIs so that I can trip next week, because it is extremely dangerous to stop taking your SSRIs in a blunt, kind of just off the cuff, cold turkey kind of way. You can cause serotonin withdrawal if you decrease quickly or just completely stop taking your SSRIs. So be very careful. The question really becomes the pros and cons of stopping SSRIs so that you can incorporate more psychedelics into your therapeutic regimen. But this should always be done with a doctor, specifically an expert in psychedelic assisted therapies. Okay, so then the other thing is that I will say there is no current research or studies done that show that it is beyond a doubt 100% definitely dangerous to mix the two, just so that you know. The theory is that perhaps they can be taken in a complementary sort of way, because psychedelics and SSRIs might work on slightly different pathways within the serotonergic system. But I will say that there is a little bit more evidence when it comes to taking MDMA when you're on SSRIs. A lot of people forget that MDMA is actually very similar to a psychedelic. And we need to start thinking of it as a psychedelic. So essentially, there is a study that was funded through MAPS, and it looked at people with a history of SSRI usage and how they interact with MDMA. And it found that people who have been on SSRIs, they actually tend to overconsume MDMA so that they can achieve a similar amount of high as, say, their friends in the room who have never taken SSRIs. But this is extremely, extremely dangerous. And the reason why is because it could lead to what's called serotonin syndrome, which is just an overflooding of the system with serotonin. And this causes neuronal dysfunction. It can cause seizures. It can interact with your heart, and it can actually result in death. And a lot of the times that you hear about people who have had issues with passing away on MDMA, a lot of them had been currently or previously on SSRIs. So be extremely careful. If you're on SSRIs, safest thing is to not take MDMA at all. And I do want to emphasize too that if you're on SSRIs and you're thinking about stopping, it's definitely a risk that when you decrease or stop your SSRIs, your suicidal ideations might come back, or you might start having them and you've never experienced them before. So be very careful with suicide and make sure that you consult with your doctor first. Essentially, the name of the game here is being more careful and being more cautious. If you're on SSRIs, if you want to utilize psychedelics, safety is always first. So reach out to those experts in the field, or hit me up if you have any questions. I can point you in the direction of some interesting studies that have been published. But a lot of the information that I'm talking about, this is not published yet. So we're all sort of still in limbo here. The jury is still out, but more information is to come. So check you later.